Greetings. In this video, you will hear the most interesting and scary 5 horror stories. If you like these stories, you can subscribe so you don't lose my channel. Enjoy watching. The silence between stars. The void was absolute. Commander Elias Voss floated in the observation deck of the deep space vessel Odysseus, staring into the abyss beyond the reinforced glass. The stars burned like cold pinpricks against a canvas of endless black, their light ancient, indifferent. Space was not quiet as many believed. It was filled with the subtle hum of systems, the faint vibrations of the ship's pulse, and the echoes of his own breathing inside his helmet. But something had changed. The hum was gone. It began with a flicker, a momentary glitch in the ship's power grid. Nothing alarming. The crew joked about it, chalking it up to routine system fatigue. Odysseus had been drifting near the edge of known space, surveying the remains of a long-dead supernova. A simple mission. Data collection. No threats. No variables. But then the lights dimmed, and the temperature began to drop. And the silence crept in. Not just the absence of sound. This was something deeper, more oppressive. A suffocating stillness that settled into the bones, gnawed at the mind. Elias felt it first when he tried to contact engineering. No response. Static hissed over the comms. But beneath that static, there was something else. A faint whisper, just at the edge of hearing, like words spoken underwater. When Elias finally forced the manual doors open to the lower deck, he found the corridor empty. No bodies. No blood. Just the faint, metallic scent of ozone, and the distant echo of footsteps that weren't his. But there was no one there. The crew's disappearance was systematic, methodical. One by one, they vanished. No alarms. No signs of struggle. They simply ceased to exist, as if space itself had swallowed them whole. Elias tried to rationalize it. Maybe a breach in the hull? A depressurization? But the ship's structure was intact. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of life or death. Then the voices started. At first, he thought it was sleep deprivation, hallucinations, but they grew clearer with each passing hour. Voices he recognized. His crew calling out for help, whispering from the shadows, their tones warped, stretched into something inhuman. Elias wasn't alone. In the darkness of the observation deck, he saw it. A distortion. Not a figure. Not exactly. More like a ripple in reality itself. The air bending, folding unnaturally as if space was rejecting its own form. The shape shifted, pulsating with an energy that made his vision blur and his skin crawl. It wasn't something that could be defined by eyes alone. It was wrong. A mistake in the fabric of existence. Elias ran. But where do you run on a ship isolated in the void? The walls felt narrower, the corridors longer. Time slipped strangely, moments stretching and contracting. Days, or minutes, passed, indistinguishable. The ship felt alive, but not in the mechanical, comforting way it once had. Now it breathed, watched, listened. Desperation drove Elias to the escape pod, but the controls were fused, as if melted from the inside. He pounded on the hatch until his hands bled, the cold biting through his suit. Behind him, footsteps approached, slow, deliberate, not rushed, because whatever it was, it didn't need to hurry. It already had him. Elias left a final message, his voice trembling, his words fragmented with fear and static. It was found decades later, drifting among the debris of Odysseus, the ship itself a hollow husk. No bodies, no answers. Just that message. It's not out there, he whispered, breath ragged. It's between the stars. Between us. We were never meant to look too long into the dark, because eventually, it looks back. The recording ended with silence, but not the comfortable kind. Echoes of Titan. The first scream wasn't human. It crackled through the comms at 3:17 ship time, waking Dr. Leon Ortega from a restless sleep aboard the Aegis IV, an exploratory vessel orbiting Titan, Saturn's largest moon. The sound was faint, distorted. like metal tearing underwater mixed with something that resembled a voice, but not quite. It wasn't part of any known distress protocol. It wasn't part of anything. By the time Lien reached the control deck, the crew was already gathered. Captain Soren's face was pale, his fingers white-knuckled around the edge of the console. The audio looped, playing the fragmented wail again and again. Could be interference, someone muttered. But it wasn't. Titan's atmosphere was thick, a choking soup of nitrogen and methane, incapable of carrying sound like Earth. Radio signals, yes, but this wasn't a transmission. It was raw, like it was bleeding through the frequencies themselves, something not meant to be heard. And then the screaming stopped. The crew made the mistake of going down there. Standard procedure, they said. Investigate anomalies. Retrieve samples. Document everything. But some things aren't meant to be documented. The landing team consisted of 5, Captain Soren, Lien, and 3 others. They descended through Titan's dense, orange haze, their shuttle trembling against the upper winds until the landscape unfurled beneath them. An alien sea of liquid methane, frozen ridges like the broken bones of a dead god jutting from the ground. Titan was silent, but not empty. They found it near the shoreline of Krakenmare, a structure, not a building. Not exactly. More like something grown. Organic patterns etched into black stone, spiraling geometries that made the eyes ache if you looked too long. No record of it existed in the mission logs. It wasn't supposed to be there. Captain Soren insisted on entry. Inside, the walls pulsed faintly, like veins beneath translucent skin. Lien's instruments malfunctioned. Readings fluctuated wildly before dying altogether. No electromagnetic interference. No logical explanation. Just cold, oppressive wrongness. Then the voices started. Not from the comms this time. From inside their helmets. One by one, the crew unraveled. Lieutenant Harris was the first. He stood motionless for hours, staring at the shifting walls, whispering to something only he could see. When Captain Soren tried to pull him away, Harris attacked, silent, feral. His oxygen line was severed during the struggle. He died gasping, his eyes filled with relief. The rest didn't fare better. Lien recorded everything, though she didn't know why. Maybe she hoped someone would find it. Maybe she needed proof that she wasn't insane. The footage showed faces twisted in terror, mouths moving without sound, as if reality itself muted their cries. Captain Soren disappeared into the darkness of the structure, chasing shadows that didn't belong. Lien was the last. She stumbled back to the shuttle alone, her mind frayed, her thoughts infected with echoes that weren't hers. Titan's surface stretched around her, indifferent and eternal. But the echoes followed, faint whispers threading through the static of her failing radio. She never left the moon. Decades later, a salvage team found the Aegis IV in decaying orbit, its systems long dead. They recovered Lien's recordings, shaky, distorted footage of alien architecture and crew members losing their minds. But the final clip was different. It was Lien's face, her eyes hollow, her voice a whisper layered over itself like a chorus of the damned. "It's not a place," she said. "It's a door. We didn't open it. It opened us." Behind her, just before the feed cut out, something moved. Something that shouldn't have been there. And somewhere, beneath Titan's endless haze, the echoes continued. The black drift. They found the ship adrift beyond the Oort cloud, where the sun was just another distant star. The SS Harbinger had been missing for 47 years. No distress signals. No debris fields. It had simply vanished during a deep space mining expedition near the edge of the solar system. When the salvage crew aboard the Erebus stumbled upon it, floating like a corpse in the dark, it was a miracle. Or at least, that's what they thought. The ship was intact, untouched by micrometeorite impacts, with no signs of hull breach. But no one answered their hails. The Harbinger had returned, but not its crew. Captain Reza Malik led the boarding party, accompanied by his XO, Lana Pierce, and 3 others. As they docked with the ghost ship, Their lights pierced the stagnant darkness of its interior. The corridors were pristine, like time had forgotten to touch them. No blood, no signs of violence, just the eerie stillness of a vessel abandoned mid-task. Mugs of cold coffee still sat on control panels. A data pad lay on the floor, its screen cracked but flickering with fragmented logs. Personal belongings remained in crew quarters, untouched. Clothes hung neatly, photos pinned to walls, frozen snapshots of lives interrupted. But no bodies. Not one. Pierce found the first message scrawled into the wall near the central atrium, carved deep into the metal with something sharp. The dark remembers. There were more messages, scattered throughout the ship, etched into doors, scratched onto control panels, even burned into ceilings. Some were written in blood, others in a substance no one could identify, dark and iridescent, shifting colors under their flashlights. The air was breathable but stale, thick with a metallic tang that clung to the back of their throats. Then they heard footsteps. The crew split up, against protocol, but curiosity had always been humanity's fatal flaw. Malik and Pierce traced the sounds to the lower decks, where the lights flickered sporadically. Their flashlights caught glimpses of movement, shadows darting just out of sight. But their scanners showed nothing. No life signs. No heat signatures. Yet something was there. Pierce's voice shook when she called over the comms. "Captain, I think the ship's alive." At first, Malik thought she meant figuratively. But then the walls began to breathe. Subtle at first, a faint pulse beneath the metal, like a slow heartbeat reverberating through the floor. Panels shifted when touched, as if reacting. The temperature fluctuated wildly, from freezing cold to suffocating heat within minutes. And then the whispers started. Not through the comms. Not echoes. Inside their heads. One of the salvage crew, Ortega, vanished without a trace. They found his helmet floating in the hydroponics bay, filled with water that hadn't been there before. His suit lay nearby, empty, as if whatever had been inside simply evaporated. Panic set in. Malik ordered an immediate evacuation, but the Erebus was gone. Not destroyed. Not missing. Just gone. Only darkness greeted them outside the airlock. A vast expanse of nothingness where space should have been. No stars. No distant planets. Just an infinite, suffocating void. The Harbinger had moved. But to where? Or when? Desperation drove Malik deeper into the ship, seeking answers. The bridge logs were corrupted, but fragments remained. A captain's log from the Harbinger's last recorded day. "We found it drifting, a fragment of something older than time. We brought it aboard. It was a mistake. No details. No coordinates. Just that ominous entry." In the final hours, Pierce lost her mind, muttering the same phrase over and over. "It's looking through us. Not at us. Through us." When the next salvage team arrived, decades later, they found the Harbinger again. This time, floating near Neptune's orbit. Empty. No sign of the Erebus crew. No messages on the walls. No strange substances. The ship was sterile, as if scrubbed clean. Except for one thing. In the captain's chair sat Reza Malik's uniform, neatly folded. And beside it, etched into the metal with something sharp. The dark remembers. And now, it had remembered them. The red hour. Time doesn't behave the same on Mars. Dr. Imani Khalid had always believed in the cold, hard logic of science. As the lead geologist of the Daedalus Research Outpost, she trusted data, not superstition. Mars was just another rock, a dusty relic of a dead planet, its secrets buried beneath layers of iron-rich soil. But that was before Sol 237, before the red hour. It began with the clock, 7:13 MTC. The morning shift had just started. Imani was analyzing core samples when she noticed her watch was wrong. It was 7:13, but her digital display flickered, stuttering between numbers. 7:13, 8:47, 6:02, 23:59. Then, it stopped altogether. She shrugged it off. Malfunction, maybe radiation interference. But then she noticed her coffee was cold, not lukewarm, frozen. Ice crystals clung to the rim of the mug, though the outpost's temperature was stable at 21 degrees Celsius. Confused, Imani checked the environmental controls. The system showed no errors. But when she looked out the observation window, the Martian landscape had changed. The sun, Phobos, hung in the sky, unmoving. Time had stopped. The rest of the crew felt it too. 6 people trapped inside a station built for logic and control, suddenly at the mercy of something they couldn't quantify. Clocks refused to tick. Fluids floated unnaturally, as if gravity itself was uncertain. When they spoke, their voices echoed strangely, like the sound was trying to catch up. But the worst part wasn't what stopped. It was what didn't. They weren't alone anymore. At first, they thought it was a trick of the light, shadows moving where there was no source, shapes flickering at the edge of vision, reflections that didn't match their movements. Then the shapes grew bolder. Figures appeared outside the outpost, walking across the barren Martian plains without suits, their forms thin and elongated, distorted like static on an old screen. They stood still, heads tilted unnaturally, as if watching. The crew tried to contact Earth. No signal. Tried to run diagnostics, systems unresponsive. The emergency protocols failed. Even the escape pods wouldn't power up. Then the screaming started. Engineer Raj Patel was the first. He'd gone to check the reactor, his voice steady over the comms until it wasn't. Static swallowed his words, followed by wet, tearing sounds and something else. Something wrong. When they found him, Raj wasn't dead. Not exactly. His body was suspended mid-air, limbs twisted at impossible angles, skin stretched thin as parchment. His mouth was open in a silent scream, frozen in time like everything else, except for his eyes. They still moved. Panic splintered the crew. Some wanted to barricade themselves. Others thought they needed to confront whatever was outside. Imani tried to hold them together, but fear is contagious, and on Mars, there's nowhere to run. One by one, the crew vanished, sometimes right in front of her. One blink, and they were gone. No sound, no struggle. Just gone. Imani was alone, or she thought she was. She started seeing herself, reflections in the glass that didn't match her movements. Her own face, but different. Older, younger, decayed, smiling when she wasn't. She found messages written in places she never remembered writing. Don't look at the sky. You're already dead. Time is the prison. She didn't remember writing them, but the handwriting was hers. And the shadows grew closer. Her final log was brief, her voice ragged and thin. I don't know how long it's been. Time doesn't mean anything here. Maybe it never did. They're not from the future. They're not from the past. They're from between. A pause. The red hour isn't an event. It's a place. The log ends with static. Years later, a rescue mission arrived at Daedalus. The outpost was intact, systems functional, but there was no crew, no bodies, no signs of struggle, except for one thing. Imani's voice, still playing faintly through the comms, even though the station's power had been dead for years. 713, she whispered. It's always 713. And outside the observation window, faint footprints led into the endless Martian dust. But none led back. The event horizon anomaly? The last transmission from the ISS Nightshade was nothing but a single, fractured word. Help. It wasn't a distress signal. No coordinates. No emergency codes. Just that one word, repeated over and over, layered with static and something else. Something that sounded like screaming underneath, buried deep in the background noise. The Nightshade had been conducting research near the edge of a black hole designated XG, 17 Kronos, far beyond the boundaries of charted space. Its mission, to study gravitational anomalies and dark matter interactions. Routine, by cosmic standards. Until the signal stopped. The ship vanished. But 5 years later, it came back. The salvage vessel Oblivion was the first to find it, drifting just outside the black hole's event horizon. An impossible position. No ship could escape once crossing that boundary. The gravitational forces should have crushed it into atoms, stretched into cosmic dust. And yet, there it was, intact. Captain Arlen Graves led the boarding team, along with Dr. Eliza Rowan, an astrophysicist specializing in black hole phenomena. They docked cautiously, weapons drawn. Not standard for a rescue mission, but something about the nightshade felt wrong. The airlock hissed open, and the smell hit them first. It wasn't decay. Not exactly. More like burnt metal mixed with something organic, something wet. The lights flickered dimly, bathing the corridors in a sickly red hue. Emergency systems were still active, despite the ship being power dead for years. No bodies. No blood. But there were marks. Deep scratches carved into the walls, gouged by something stronger than human hands. Symbols, spirals, jagged lines that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. The temperature fluctuated wildly. Frost coated some walls. Others dripped with condensation as if the ship itself was sweating. And then they heard it.